The film opens with a group of elite soldiers, known as the Phoenix Team, entering a tunnel to carry out a high-stakes mission. Their objective is to infiltrate the headquarters of an illegal arms-dealing mafia in the country of Costa Verde. After swiftly neutralizing a guard, they take control of the CCTV system, manipulating it to their advantage. Meanwhile, two snipers from the Phoenix Team, Brandon and his partner Zondi, are positioned outside, waiting for the signal from their comrades inside the tunnel. Moments later, the signal comes, and Brandon and Zondi carefully select their targets before taking action. As the Phoenix Team emerges from the tunnel, they storm the Mafia's stronghold, spreading out to execute their individual tasks. One by one, the enemies are silently eliminated. However, one of the Mafia members realizes their base is under siege. He rushes to inform his boss of the situation. Knowing this, Kovalov, the ruthless Mafia leader, fires several shots into the air and triggers an alarm to alert his men of the intruders. Chaos erupts as Kovalov's men swarm into action, and a fierce gunfight breaks out. On the other side of the battlefield, two of Kovalov's snipers attempt to take out Brandon and Zondi, but Zondi spots their position just in time. Together, he and Brandon eliminate the threat. Kovalov and one of his remaining henchmen try to reposition themselves while continuing to fight back. Desperate, Kovalov contacts his ally, the Prime Minister, who is complicit in his operations, and requests immediate reinforcements. Unexpectedly, the Prime Minister informs him that backup will arrive in 1 to 2 hours. Realizing the dire situation, Kovalov activates a devastating new weapon developed by his men, a last-resort device designed to obliterate everything if they are cornered. Soon after, the Phoenix Team successfully surrounds Kovalov and his last remaining ally. Defiant, Kovalov declares that they will all be destroyed. At the same time, a massive shockwave erupts, throwing everyone in the room, including Kovalov and his men, to the ground. The scene shifts to 2 days earlier, showing a dragonfly-like aircraft landing on the barren terrain of Costa Verde. Unexpectedly, Brandon comes out from the aircraft, as has been called in to assist with the mission. At that moment, he is greeted by a commander named Modis, who expresses his gratitude for Brandon's arrival. Modis explains that Brandon's legendary skills as a sniper are a welcome addition to their forces. As a result, two of Modis' men, including one named Nova, welcome Brandon warmly. As they travel to the base, Nova shares the tragic history of his country. He reveals that his father once ruled the nation but was betrayed and killed by his own uncle, who now serves as the Prime Minister. His uncle has conspired with a Russian mafia boss to develop advanced weapons technology. If completed, these weapons could enable invasions of other nations. Upon arriving at the base, Brandon is reunited with his old friend, Zero, the head of the CIA. Zero explains that Brandon has been called in to help capture Kovalov, the Russian mafia boss who has long been supplying illegal weapons to America. However, Kovalov has grown more powerful due to his alliance with the Prime Minister, making him an even greater threat. Zero then introduces Brandon to the soldiers at the base. They will form a unified team to take down Kovalov. Soon after, Modis brings forward a young man named Zondi, a talented but inexperienced sniper who is yet to take a life. After the introductions, the team begins training as if they were already in the mafia boss's lair, while Zondi practices his shooting under Brandon's guidance. Once the training session ends, Zondi asks Brandon what the hardest part of being a sniper is. Brandon replies that taking a life for the first time is the most difficult challenge, as it forces confront the weight of ending someone's existence. The two then discuss the layout of the room they will be attacking. Modis and his deputy outline the details of the mission, assigning specific roles to each soldier. Modis proudly names their unit Phoenix. A few hours later, the soldiers gather to relax and share a meal. One of them asks Modis who the first person he recruited was. Modis reveals that it was his deputy, Angel. He goes on to recount Angel's incredible bravery during a confrontation with terrorists. Despite being outnumbered and stabbed 12 times, Angel fought back with her bare hands, ultimately defeating her attackers. Hearing this, the soldiers eagerly ask Angel to show them the scars from that battle, and she shyly obliges. After the meal, Brandon approaches two soldiers who are always seen together and asks if they are married. They explain that they are not a couple but siblings. When Brandon inquires if they use axes in combat, they confirm it. It turns out they are known as the twin axes, as they always rely on their trusty axes as a last resort weapon. The next day, Zero asks Angel what she's working on. Angel then reveals that she is sketching the face of the militant who killed her daughter, hoping to one day exact revenge. It was revealed that the perpetrator is one of the Prime Minister's men, which is why Angel joined this group in the first place. Later, Modest gathers all the troops to deliver a motivational speech. He emphasizes that their primary mission is to capture Kovalov alive, so he can stand trial in an international court and expose the Prime Minister's crimes. However, if Kovalov resists, they are authorized to eliminate him. One evening, Modest inquired of Brandon about Zondi's progress. At that moment, he asked if Zondi ready to be considered Brandon's equal as a sniper, given his lack of experience. In response, Brandon replied that he would test Zondi that very night. If he failed, Zondi would be excluded from the upcoming mission. Later that night, Brandon took Zondi to a secluded spot and instructed him to shoot a man smoking outside a nearby house. Zondi hesitated, grappling with the unfamiliar situation and questioning why he should kill someone without a clear reason. Despite this, Brandon firmly stated that Zondi shouldn't overthink it. This was simply the nature of their work. With lingering doubts, Zondi pulled the trigger, complying with Brandon's order. However, the gun fired blanks. Zondi was perplexed, unsure of Brandon's true intentions. Brandon then explained that this was a mental test for Zondi. If Zondi refused to pull the trigger, he would have failed the test and been barred from the mission. Fortunately, despite his reservations, Zondi passed. At that moment, Brandon recounted how he himself had failed a similar test in the past, resulting in an additional 2 years of military training. The following day, the entire Phoenix squad prepared for their mission. Soon after, they piled into their vehicles and engaged in combat, as depicted in the film's opening scenes. The scene then jumps back to the present, where Kovalov is about to detonate his advanced weapon. Unexpectedly, everyone in the room survives the blast unscathed, including Kovalov. Suddenly, Zero enters and holds Kovalov at gunpoint. Soon after, the entire Phoenix team assembles, including Brandon. They turn to Modest for an explanation of the recent explosion. Modest informs them that Kovalov had unleashed a sonic wave from his weapon, but fortunately, everyone was unharmed. Modest then urges them to retrieve the server data from the advanced weapon, which is still under development. However, Kovalov warns that they are all in grave danger, as the Prime Minister's militant forces are about to arrive, and the sonic wave will soon trigger a catastrophic reaction. True to his word, Modest and the rest of the Phoenix squad, including Kovalov, collapse moments later. Kovalov's weapons designer is immediately questioned about how to stop the impending disaster, but he confesses that there is nothing they can do. Shortly after, everyone exposed to the wave is doomed to die. Only a handful of Phoenix members remain. Acting quickly, Zero urges them to evacuate before the Prime Minister's militants arrive. However, Angel refuses to leave without their fallen comrades, insisting on giving them a proper burial. A heated argument ensues between Zero and Angel until Nova intervenes, suggesting that Brandon should make the final decision. After a moment of consideration, Brandon stated that they needed to retrieve the server data from the advanced weapon. If they failed to do so, the Prime Minister would proceed with its development, potentially obliterating a city or even a country within 3 minutes. As a result, Brandon urged Zero and Nova to head to the lab, while instructing the other 3 to transport their fallen comrade's body to the tunnel. Inside the lab, Nova revealed that the weapon was 70% complete, and the earlier explosion was merely a small-scale test. It was revealed that several nations, including North Korea, had already procured raw materials for the weapon. Zero then inquired whether they could transport the entire server, to which Nova responded that it would be impossible without numerous vehicles. Ultimately, Brandon resolved to upload all the server data to a satellite, enabling access for the United Nations. They couldn't risk destroying the lab at that moment, as it would hinder their ability to anticipate if another group managed to develop it. Not long after, the entire team gathered, and Brandon outlined his plan to upload the server data to a satellite. Angel expressed apprehension, citing the time-consuming process and the imminent arrival of the Prime Minister's militant group. Despite this, Brandon asserted that it was a risk they had to take. Following their agreement, Brandon assigned tasks. Nova would handle the server data upload, while the others would prepare ammunition traps and strategic positions. Eventually, Nova attempted to contact modest comrades via satellite, hoping they could provide assistance, though Nova remained somewhat pessimistic. 30 minutes later, the server data upload had only reached 50%. Brandon then handed Nova a cell phone, explaining that the first call connected to the bomb in the corridor, while the second call linked to the bomb in the lab room. Shortly after, every team member assumed their respective positions. A member named Hera, still reeling from her brother's death, vowed to fight with all her might, seeking vengeance. Moments later, the Prime Minister's militant forces arrived. As two vehicles breached the perimeter, Brandon's forces rallied, successfully neutralizing dozens of enemy soldiers. At one point, Hera ran out of ammunition and was instructed to retreat inside the base. Hera then found herself cornered by a soldier and fell into the water. Other soldiers surrounded Hera, but she cunningly stated that they were pursuing the wrong woman. In a desperate move, Hera brandished her trusty axe weapon and managed to overpower the enemy troops. Meanwhile, Zondi, Angel, and Zero found themselves cornered, their ammunition depleted. Just in the nick of time, Brandon descended from the rooftop, ordering them to retreat to base while he held off the enemy. In a separate confrontation, Angel finally faced the woman who had killed her daughter, engaging in a fierce duel that ended with the woman's demise. Shortly after, Brandon and Zero crossed paths. At that moment, Zero directed Brandon to the kitchen, while he himself entered the office, confronting a group of enemy soldiers. Despite this, Brandon also faced his share of enemy soldiers. On the other hand, 7 enemy soldiers advanced on Nova. Feeling overwhelmed, Nova made a desperate call, connecting to the bombs planted in the hallway. Soon after, he informed the team that the upload was complete, urging them to evacuate immediately and regroup at the designated rendezvous point. The scene then shifted to Hera, who found herself surrounded until the lights suddenly went out. When Hera switched on her flashlight, she found herself face-to-face with several soldiers who immediately attacked her. Tragically, Hera was killed. Elsewhere, Brandon is seen urging his troops to continue towards the rendezvous point. As Brandon made his escape, he was shot and staggered. Seeing this, Zero rushed to his side, reassuring him that everything would be all right. In another location, Nova was also shot multiple times, but Zondi and Angel swiftly eliminated the soldiers who had attacked him. Soon after, all of Brandon's troops had gathered at the rendezvous point. Nova then handed his phone to Brandon, instructing him to make the second call, which would detonate the bombs in the lab. Sadly, Nova succumbed to his injuries before Brandon could make the call. In the end, Brandon ordered his troops to prepare for the explosion. Shortly after, dozens of enemy soldiers began to close in. Brandon then ordered the remaining troops to retreat to the tunnel, determined to hold back the enemy soldiers. However, Zero refused to leave his side, reminding him that it was he who had urged Brandon to come, and Zero resolved to stay with him. Finally, Brandon ordered Angel and Zondi to leave, emphasizing the importance of delivering the server data to the United Nations. Acting quickly, Brandon and Zero charged into the open field, taking down enemy soldiers one by one, until they ran out of ammunition and were cornered. Unexpectedly, the enemy soldiers were wiped out by a group of reinforcements. It turned out that these were modest comrades whom Nova had contacted earlier. They quickly rushed Nova to the hospital, discovering that he was still alive. In the aftermath, Brandon and Zero returned to America. At that moment, Zondi and Angel expressed their gratitude for their help. Not only that, Angel also revealed that the Prime Minister had been brought to justice, and his successor was Nova, who was still recovering in the hospital. In the end, Brandon and Zero then departed, bringing the story to a close. Moral lesson from the story: if you're going to join a secret mission, always double-check if your weapon has real bullets or blanks. Otherwise, you might fail a test and end up in 2 more years of training. Also, never trust a mafia boss with a last resort weapon, because it might just be a fancy doorbell that makes everyone fall down.